Okay, good afternoon, everyone. We're going to go ahead and get started. My name is Anthony Bowman. I'm the Community Partners Network Manager with Advancing Justice AAJC, the Washington, D.C.-based Advancing Justice affiliate. Thank you for joining today's webinar, especially since we only announced it Friday. We know, though, that many of us have long awaited this announcement on executive action from the President, and so we wanted to make sure that we could get information out to the community as soon as possible. We have three presenters on today's webinar, Aaron Oshiro and Purna Lal, both attorneys here at Advancing Justice AAJC, as well as Michelle Salcedo, a legal advocate at Asian Americans Advancing Justice in Los Angeles. My colleagues will present for about 40 minutes, and towards the end of our webinar, we will have approximately 15 minutes for question and answers. During that time, if you have a question, please use the raise your hand feature and we can unmute you. However, we are recording this webinar, so if you prefer to submit your question anonymously using the chat feature, you can do that as well. So now I'd like to turn it over to Aaron, who will go over the webinar's agenda and provide more context for today's presentation.
Thank you, Anthony, and thank you to everyone joining today's webinar. The purpose of today's webinar is to explain some key components from President Obama's immigration announcement last week, suggest what the community can be doing now, and to take some of your questions. In a moment, I'm going to provide more context for today's webinar and share some suggested messaging. Then my colleague, agenda. In a moment, I'm going to provide some more context for today's webinar. And then my colleague, Purna Lal, will provide an overview of the changes to DACA, the new Deferred Action for Parental Accountability Program, and a few other specific policy changes. Then Michelle Salcedo from Advancing Justice LA will talk about the key role that community partners will play for outreach and education on these new changes and suggest some actions that the community can take right now. And as Anthony said, we'll end up the program with Q&A. The administration will be taking action on a number of immigration items, but because the webinar is only 1 hour today, we're only going to cover a few key policy changes. For today's purposes, we're not going to be speaking about the border or enforcement more generally, or business and employment issues. We do hope to have more webinars on some of those topics in the future, and we are happy to answer questions offline, but that's not going to be the focus of today's webinar. So we really want to think about what this means for our community. Last Thursday, the President announced something they're calling Immigration Accountability Executive Action. As my colleague Purna will explain, two of the key pieces are, one, expansion of Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, or DACA, and two, creation of a Deferred Action Program for certain undocumented parents. So for our community, this is really significant, and I think that many of you know that. The most recent estimate is that about 475,000 undocumented AAPIs stand to benefit from both the current DACA program, expanded DACA, and the new Parental Deferred Action Program. So this is really significant considering that 1.3 million AAPIs are undocumented. Estimates show that the four communities that stand to benefit the most numerically are Indian, Chinese, Korean, and Filipino Americans. And we have a graph here that shows some of that. The hard part will be helping our eligible community members understand these programs and applying. Many of us know, especially those of you who are on the ground and doing this work, how hard it has been to help AAPIs apply for DACA the past few years. We know that over 110,000 AAPIs were eligible when DACA started or would have aged into the program, but only about a third of eligible AAPIs have applied. So we want to sort of think about the DACA experience and what that means for the new programs. I think looking at DACA, some of the reasons for low applications vary, but we know that there is a lot of fear among community members about coming forward. People with undocumented parents or other family members are afraid of what applying for DACA means for their loved ones who are ineligible for relief. And we also know that there is a lot of stigma and shame in our community about not having legal status. Also, our community has not had the resources to do the consistent and deep targeting that we need for these hard-to-reach individuals. And for many, the application cost has been a significant barrier, and the available fee waivers have been too limited. And, you know, it's also possible that we haven't done a good enough job providing education about the significant benefits of having DACA and sort of selling the program from that perspective. Now, with so much at stake, as community members and partners, we really need to learn from DACA and redouble our efforts to get eligible individuals to apply for administrative relief. Also, we know that legislative reform for immigration is not realistic right now, and so people should be seeking whatever protection and relief is available to them. It's really important that in these next weeks and months that people are getting accurate information and people aren't afraid to apply later and that they are not taken advantage of. And Perna and Michelle will speak to that a bit more in their presentations. Oh, sorry. Some of our partners, the last thing I want to touch on are some messaging. Some of our partners have been asking how to talk about executive action to community members or the media. Advancing Justice AAGC has pulled together some potential talking points. We know that many organizations and community members have different opinions on executive action and what it means, what it doesn't mean. So the messages here are by no means the only way to talk about this issue, but we did want to provide them in case they are helpful. You know, so we do want to recognize, and you can see here that this is a historic victory for our community, and we should celebrate that. It took a lot of hard work by a lot of people putting everything on the line to get this result, and we should recognize that and honor that. And it will help a lot of people. At the same time, we know that it's not enough, that people that we love were left out, including moms and dads already deported, individuals who don't have the family ties that Perna will speak about, but who have built lives here and are working hard. And then there are also people, you know, waiting years in the backlog, and this impacts our community in particular. So even as we are ready and eager to help eligible people apply for relief that is important and significant, you know, we don't want to forget who was excluded. And we want to remember that this is a temporary Band-Aid and that we need real legislative changes that permanently protect our community members. And with that, I will hand it over to my colleague Perna to speak about some of the specific changes that the President announced.
Thank you, Erin. So basically, first we'll go over the expansion of Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, which is DACA. For those of you not familiar with DACA or need a refresher, DACA was for childhood arrivals, basically people who arrived before the age of 16, were under 31 as of June 15, 2012, had no lawful status, were present in the country as of June 15, 2012, in school or obtained a GED or diploma, and who had entered before June 15, 2007. Now, there are changes to this program. Under the President's announcement last week, there is no longer an upper-level age cap, which means that people older than 31 on June 15, 2012 can apply for DACA, which means people like, say, Jose Antonio Vargas is now eligible for this program. The other change has been that the entry date has been moved from June 15, 2007 to January 1st, 2010. And that, you know, will make so many more people eligible for DACA. The other change, the third change to the program has been that instead of 2-year work permits, as of today, there will be 3-year work permits given to all applications. As for the implementation of this program, for those people who are newly eligible for DACA, as in people who weren't eligible before, they'll be able to apply hopefully in 90 days. The exclusions remain the same for people who have criminal histories, which is a felony, a significant misdemeanor, or 3 or more misdemeanors, and people who have criminal histories who should consult with an attorney. As always, the next program after DACA it's a new program completely. It's called the Deferred Action for Parental Accountability, or DAPA. It is for parents of U.S. citizens or lawful permanent residents, and there is no age limit on the age of the U.S. citizen or lawful permanent resident. They could be 5 or they could be 50. It doesn't really matter. So any U.S. citizen or lawful permanent resident, which is basically a green card holder who has a parent here, those parents can apply for this. The legal relationship between the parent and the child must have been established on the day of or before the announcement, which basically means anyone who's born after this date, the November 21st, 2014, will not be eligible in all likelihood. Also, the parent must have been present in the U.S. since January 1st, 2010. This is the same date as the new date for the DACA eligibility, so both dates of entry are now the same. And as for physical presence, the parent must have been present as of the President's announcement, November 20th, 2014. So parents who enter the country after this, after November 20th, 2014, will not be eligible for this program. And they must also have been without lawful status as of November 20th, 2014. The program also, just like DACA, will now give a 3-year work permit as well to parents who qualify. And later on, if the parents apply for advanced parole, they could also travel back and forth to go back to their countries of origin if they need to, but we need more details on that. The implementation of this is approximately 6 months, so it's a while. It was longer than DACA is. There's similar exclusions for criminal history as of DACA. People with a felony, significant misdemeanor, or 3 or more misdemeanors do not qualify for this program, and if they have any sort of criminal history, they should see an attorney. And people currently in proceedings, as in people who are facing removal from the U.S. or with a final order of removal that was entered before January 1st, 2014, would be also eligible for this program. The next big thing that affects at least API communities that was announced last week is the expansion of provisional stateside waivers for unlawful presence. It's a mouthful, but basically what it means is that undocumented individuals who have been residing unlawfully in the U.S. past 6 months require an extreme hardship waiver to apply for adjustment of status or a green card in this country. There were changes to this waiver. Usually people have to leave the U.S. and travel abroad to their own countries and wait for the waiver to be approved there, which requires family separation. But the Obama administration had made changes to this waiver before. Spouses and minor children of U.S. citizens were able to qualify for this waiver without leaving the country starting in 2012, 2013. And as of last week, this waiver has now been extended to sons and daughters of U.S. citizens and the spouses, sons, and daughters of lawful permanent residents, which means that anyone who's trying to get a green card but has unlawful presence or unlawful entry can actually apply for the waiver without leaving the country. As for the timeline on this, it hasn't been rolled out yet. There will be new rulemaking for this, and USCIS will also have to do rulemaking to clarify what extreme hardship means as well for this waiver, because it's not very clear. There might be a presumption of extreme hardship standard as well. But we won't see this waiver being rolled out for at least another year, so people should stay put. It's just a warning that these 3 initiatives that I talked about have not been implemented by USCIS, and there's no applications at this time. So people should be aware of anyone who is offering to help individuals submit an application or request any of these actions before they become available, because you may be subject to a scam or fraud. And Michelle will, I think, talk about this a little bit more in detail as what people should be doing. There's other important changes as well that we'll go over quickly. One is to naturalization and immigrant integration. The USCIS will begin allowing people to pay naturalization fees with a credit card no later than the end of 2015, because a lot of people can't afford to pay them up front. The agency will also possibly create a partial fee waiver for anyone whose income is between 150% and 200% of the federal poverty line. And the agency will also launch a new campaign to promote citizenship for lawful permanent residents who are in 10 different states, because those states are the home to about 75% of the LPR population. And the final point of naturalization is that the White House will establish a new task force on new Americans to look at immigrant integration and to see what it can do on a federal level to promote immigrant integration. The other category of things that are going to change a little bit is the U visa, which is basically a legal status for victims of a list of crimes in the U.S. or in violation of U.S. laws. And the Department of Labor is adding 3 new qualifying crimes: extortion, forced labor, and fraud in foreign labor contracting, which may affect API communities, and as well as the T visa, which is a trafficking visa for victims of trafficking. The Department of Labor will be able to also complete certifications for these. Finally, the other important change is a provision called parole in place, which will be expanded to the immediate relatives, as in the spouse, parent, or child of a U.S. citizen or lawful permanent resident who's seeking to enlist in the military. Parole in place basically just allows someone who's here. It's just like deferred action, only it actually is also a waiver for unlawful entry. And I believe that those people who entered lawfully would be able to also have deferred action under this new program, but nothing has changed yet. It'll be on a case-by-case basis. With that, I'll hand it over to Anthony.
Yes. Yes, thank you, Purna and Aaron, both. I'm now going to go ahead and transition the presentation over to Michelle, who's joining us from the West Coast with Asian Americans Advancing Justice Los Angeles. Michelle, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, wonderful. I'm going to transfer the presentation over to you. You should have control.
Great.
Okay, it looks like everyone can see your screen now.
Great. So hello everybody, and thank you for joining us today. I'm going to talk a little bit about what can community organizations do to support their respective communities. And first, it starts off with staying informed and up to date on the developments with DAPA and DACA expansion. And there are currently several reliable resources available, including our own Advancing Justice affiliates that have valuable information and that will continue to update as it becomes available. There's also a list of several resources that will be provided at the end of the presentations, which you can refer to. I would like to just put out a warning that to beware of what is portrayed in the media as far as information goes, because it often can be inaccurate or misrepresentative. So if you have any questions, please reach out to one of our affiliates or also stay informed with the different resources that we'll be listing. And in terms of getting accurate information out there, please note we want you to share the knowledge to be able to stay informed and also inform the community. So there's ways of disseminating information to your communities that can be effective in different ways. And these can come in the way of informational flyers, community presentations and informational sessions, workshops, media briefings to actually develop the messaging that we want the media to show to our communities, canvassing, phone banking, and many other options. We want to make sure that, like I said, there's accurate information out there, and to also ensure that our community stays protected from fraud. So just wanted to put out there that please note that there's a fine line between sharing general information and actually providing legal advice. So if you're not a licensed attorney or BIA accredited representative, you cannot provide legal advice to anyone. So this includes things like, for example, if somebody asks you, I have such and such criminal conviction, am I eligible to apply? That's why we always suggest that the person with that type of issue contact an accredited representative or a licensed immigration attorney, because only those two types of individuals can actually help someone determine their eligibility. Furthermore, if you are faced with a specific legal question or you're unsure about how to answer a question, please refer the person to a trusted legal organization such as the different Advancing Justice affiliates, or to a trusted licensed attorney, or to one of the helpful websites such as adminrelief.org, which we'll have a link to at the end of the presentation. Through this, you'll not only be able to protect people from erroneous information that could tarnish someone's eligibility, but you'll also be able to protect them from immigration scams, which can make someone very susceptible to fraud and ruin their chances of being able to benefit from DAPA or the DACA expansion. Another thing that I want to share that might be might be able to really help communities to come out of the shadows and be able to benefit from this is to establish and to disseminate messaging that resonates in your community. You know, undocumented immigration and the fight for immigration reform is really something that affects all nationalities. And one big barrier that we tend to come up to when it comes to effective outreach is really finding the messaging that resonates with each community. Often the public mainstream rhetoric focuses on immigration as a Latino issue, and we all know that that is not the case, that it affects our API community to a very high extent. So it is important to know what messages resonate with our community, identifying the key issues within that, and really catering the conversation and any information that's presented to the community in that way. One example that I'd like to share is that Advancing Justice LA has been working with the Filipino consulate, and when we asked the Consul General what's the most effective way to outreach the Filipino community, he mentioned that in his own presentations he often asks people who here cares about immigration reform or is affected by it, and he'll often get very few hands, if any. But he says that when he makes the messaging to be who cares about being able to bring their mother to the United States without having to wait such a long time, or being able to petition for your sister without having to wait 20 years, or being able to have your very talented cousin get a work visa. Oftentimes he gets a room full of hands raised. So it's a matter of really finding out what your community cares within what your community finds to be the biggest issue within the immigration debate, and really making that resonate when you're messaging and how they can benefit from these programs. Finally, another way that you can support your community is by considering becoming BIA recognized and accredited, and that's the Bureau of Immigration Appeals. Currently, CLINIC, which is a Catholic Immigration Network, is working to get different community organizations geared up to be able to provide legal services for their communities, and this can come in the way of becoming BIA recognized, a BIA recognized organization. And like I mentioned earlier, what that would allow is for community organizations to be able to actually provide eligibility screenings, legal services, which, as we all know, will be very much needed. I apologize for this. So what can the community do to prepare now? If someone qualifies for DACA as it currently stands, please encourage them to apply. As mentioned earlier, the DACA expansion will not kick in until about February of 2015. So if someone is thinking of waiting for one reason or another, please tell them that if they currently apply, they can qualify and benefit now. And in fact, as Perna mentioned, they will be having that three-year period of relief starting today. Additionally, the community can start preparing by gathering documents to help prove the proposed requirements in their DAPA and the DACA expansion. So it is best to collect documents that have a person's name, a date, and an indication that it took place in the United States. Examples of documents to include, and here I list a few to prove identity. That can be birth certificate and photo ID, a passport, or any other identity document from the person's country of origin. Also, entry to the U.S. before January 1st, 2010. That can be a passport with the admission stamp, a document with the date of entry, or any other travel document or information that shows the date around the entry that the individual has indicated. For presence and residence in the U.S. since January 1st of 2010, it can be an array of things, including school records, medical records, bank statements, and many other things. And then for DAPA, this will be key in proving the relationship to a U.S. citizen or green card holder. So that will most likely translate to birth certificates, naturalization records for those people who have naturalized into becoming U.S. citizens, and also any immigration records to prove that a person is a green card holder. As mentioned earlier, it is very important that if there have been any arrests, convictions of a crime, or if a person is unsure about their criminal history, we encourage them to get a copy of their criminal history, whether that's through court documents that are certified or by getting a background check that can either come from their state's Department of Justice or an FBI background check, which is much more extensive and especially recommended for people who have lived in different states in the U.S. Now, we always really encourage people that if they do have any type of criminal issues, please contact an immigration attorney or a trusted legal organization. We just want to make sure that the eligibility is screened correctly and nobody's put in any type of danger if they have any criminal issues that could potentially bar them from getting this benefit. And then lastly, on how to prepare, start saving money. It's really, and we know this will be especially difficult for folks who have more than one potential beneficiary. Currently, we're expecting that the process will cost at least $465, and that's really based off the current cost of DACA. It can be higher or it can be lower, but that's a good place to start for now. And then ideas for resources and support, like I mentioned, Advancing Justice affiliates will be providing information in various capacities. So you can feel free to contact any one of our affiliates that is closer to you. Here at Advancing Justice LA, we currently have a toolkit of information for DACA already available, and it's a how-to for the process, and the one for DAPA is forthcoming. You can go to the link to check that out. We'll also be providing workshops, eligibility screenings, and other legal services in the near future, and you can check in with each one of our affiliates to see what through the website to see which other types of services will be available. Two other ideas for resources and support is to reach out to your respective consulates to coordinate how best to provide identity documents, which will be very important for our community. Establishing that relationship sooner than later will be important to really stress how important it is for our community to be able to get those documents available. And then finally, work together as community organizations locally, because we do know that there are limited resources currently, and we're all trying to reach as broad of a community as possible. It's better to coordinate together to be able to leverage each other's resources and reach more to our community. And there's several different models available currently here in Los Angeles. We have a DACA task force of different local legal provision organizations and other community stakeholders who we coordinate to provide services. I know there's something similar in the Bay Area, and I'm sure also in the DC area as well. And that's about it for my part. I don't know if you want to continue over with the Q&A, Anthony.
Yes, Michelle, thank you very much. Let me go ahead and switch back over. Okay, everyone. Yes, we're now going to start with a Q&A session, and Michelle, I'm going to leave you off mute so that you can answer any questions people have as well. Clearly, we're a little bit ahead of schedule. We have shared a lot of info. Clearly, a lot of these changes are very complex and technical, and it's part of our mission to make sure that community groups have these community outreach materials that they need to effectively reach out and make sure that people who are eligible are able to take advantage of this relief. So speaking of taking advantage of things, we hope that you'll take advantage of this time to ask some questions. As a reminder, we are recording this so that those who weren't able to join us can listen later. If you want to ask a question, you can use the raise your hand feature and we will unmute you. You can also submit a question through the My GoToWebinar window on the left, and you can also use the chat feature. Just make sure that you send it to the panelist or the organizer specifically if you want to remain anonymous. And before we start with questions, please remember that this webinar is intended for practitioners and activists, and if anyone who's joined us today is also a member of the media, please get in touch with me separately, and we can set up a time for an interview or discussion to answer questions in that capacity. But this conversation is off the record for practitioners and activists. So, does anyone have any questions? I see one raised hand. JR, did you have a question? You're unmuted now.
No, I accidentally pressed.
Did you? Oh, did you? Okay, you must have hit it by accident. No problem. I'll mute you again. Yes, Victor, Leo, you have a question? You're off mute. Everyone can hear you now.
Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Hello?
Victor?
You cannot hear me. I'll see what I can do.
Oh, I can hear you very, very faintly. Are you able to submit your question through the chat box? I'm wondering if there's something wrong with the audio on one of our...
How do I do the text off? How do I get to the text box?
It should be on the side of your, to the side of your computer. Can you...
Can I do it real quick?
Okay.
Real short question.
You know,
What is the chance of the new president, the next president, not honor this executive order?
I'm sorry, Victor. We're having a hard time hearing you. Could you please ask that question one more time?
Okay. What is the chance of the new president, the next president, that I'm not going to order this, I'm not going to honor this executive order, and I'm going to deport all those that apply?
Okay. Yes.
Hi, Victor. This is Erin Oshiro. That's a good question. We don't know, right? So this is the problem with with executive action is it is possible that the next president could come in and change his or her mind about what to do with people who have been given this relief, which is why we have to keep pushing for more permanent changes. But I do think there is some historical precedent for people who receive this relief that they get to keep it. And maybe at some point it is formalized. But I would caution people that we just don't know. But it doesn't mean people shouldn't apply now and take what they can get now. I know it's a little tricky.
Thank you.
Sure.
Okay. Does anyone else have a question? Please take advantage of this time. We have plenty of time available right now to answer your questions. Oh, it looks like, okay, we have had a question submitted. One moment, please. The question is, would this affect millions of foreign people who have been legally waiting in line to enter into the U.S. legally? Who would like to answer that? Erin?
Sure. So this is Erin again. So the changes announced last week by the president may have some impact on people who are waiting for a business and employment-based green card. It seems like the administration will be doing something to make it easier for those individuals to come to the U.S. while they wait for their their employment visa to become available. In terms of people who are waiting for a family-based visa, the administration has not made any specific changes for that in terms of helping families reunite more quickly, except let me say three things, I guess. One, parole in place for the family members, the eligible family members of military personnel or those seeking to enlist is a good thing for immigrants who have family members trying to be in the U.S. Lawfully. Two, the expansion of the provisional waiver that Perna discussed, which is technical, and I won't repeat myself in case I get it wrong. That will help people who are trying to be reunited with family members. I mean, they are here in the U.S., but it helps keep those families together and get their status. And three, the president has signed a memorandum that will establish something called the Visa Modernization Task Force. And that body, which is going to be the Department of State and Department of Homeland Security, has a mandate of coming up with recommendations to give the president on how to, make better use of our legal immigration system, particularly on the visa side, so the employment and the family-based visas. We know this is something that's really important to our community in particular because so many Asians are waiting in the backlogs both for family visas and for employment-based visas. So AAJC and many of our partners will continue to pressure the administration to do what they can with regards to those backlogs so that families can be reunited more quickly and businesses have the workers that they need and people are able to come here in a timely manner as opposed to waiting years and years like they do now. I don't know if anyone else, Michelle or Prerna, has anything more on that.
That's great.
Thanks.
Okay, wonderful. So does anyone else have any questions? We still have plenty of time.
Is there a question before this?
Hi, Anthony. This is Michelle. So I just wanted to go back a little bit in terms of the question that was asked regarding whether a future administration would get rid of the program, if I may.
Sure, absolutely.
So it's a question that we often get asked here too at Advancing Justice LA, and really what it comes down to is that if a future president were to get rid of the executive action, really what would happen people would revert back to where they started, which is to have an undocumented status. The reality is that people who qualify for these types of deferred actions, such as DACA and DAPA, are not deportation priorities, and that has been outlined by DHS. They're really not deportation priorities unless their circumstances were to change, for example, committing a felony or another type of egregious crime. Furthermore, if millions of people were to apply for this, then it would really be practically impossible for the government to try to deport all of these people. And I believe that's actually something that President Obama said in his speech. And really, there's a huge backlog in immigration courts. It already takes several years for an individual's immigration case to be resolved. So it would not only be expensive and practically impossible, it just doesn't make sense. So for a lot of people who have that fear, like I mentioned, people who qualify for DACA are not deportation priorities. So there's just the idea of losing. If we were to have the unfortunate situation of losing that, then it would just revert back to the documented status. But what it comes down to in the end is that there is power in numbers, and the more people who apply for this, the more difficult it'll be for the government to try to take this program away, as Aaron mentioned. And if we keep that in mind, and if we really get our communities to benefit from this program, we have a higher chance of it remaining in place and being a true success as we fight for something more permanent.
Okay, thank you, Michelle, for that that addition. And I can't see you because you're in LA. So if you do have anything to contribute to any of the questions that are asked, just please let me know and add that in. Do we have any more questions? Okay, yes, we've just had one submitted. Says, for people who receive deportation orders from an immigration court but are still in the United States, do they receive benefit from this executive order?
Hi, this is Brendan. That's a great question, and the answer is that they should receive this benefit of the final order of deportation that was not entered or issued against them before January 1st, 2014.
The date matters.
Right, the date matters. So if this final order was issued this year, then the parent falls under priority 3 of the enforcement memo, and this is complicated, but it basically just means if you got a final order this year, you probably do not qualify, but if you got it before that and didn't leave the country, then you are eligible for this. Does that answer your question? Is that, yeah. I think so, but it's probably 3. That's a problem.
Okay, were there any other, Michelle, did you have anything to add?
No, that covered it.
Okay, wonderful, great. It looks like we have some other questions that have been submitted. Let me pull them up here. Here's one. Will DAPA or DACA applicants be able to apply for government assistance, such as food stamps, or for Obamacare, not Obamacare, the Affordable Care Act coverage, or any other sort of services?
Hi, this is Prerna. Since DACA or DAPA is not legal status, people who qualify would not be eligible for any sort of government assistance, although people may qualify for things like in-state tuition and state-based aid, but nothing like health care or food stamps or welfare or any of those things.
So federal programs.
Right, no federal programs.
Okay, great. Are there any other questions? Please don't be shy. Okay, well, it looks like there aren't any more questions, so we'll go ahead and wrap up our webinar for today. There is a lot of information that's been presented here. I'm going to follow up with an announcement to everyone tomorrow to share this PowerPoint with you, as well as a link to the recording of this webinar so that you can review it again as it needs to be. And of course, as Michelle said, the Advancing Justice affiliates, we will continue to share resources that we create specifically for our communities, as well as the resources of other immigration advocacy partners that you might find useful in the weeks and months to come. So to conclude, if you do have any other questions, please feel free to email them to me. Here is my email address. You should be able to see that now. And in addition, there are some additional resources here, some links that you might find of interest. If you have any resources yourself that you're creating that you would like for us to share with the rest of our community partners, please do that as well. So in conclusion, I hope that you found this information that we've shared today useful. We want to continue to provide resources and materials as we learn more in the coming weeks and months. Don't hesitate to contact myself or my colleagues if you have any questions. Thank you again for your partnership, and I hope everyone has a good holiday weekend. Goodbye.